Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's the same gag I used yesterday, but it's more appropriate. It's Friday, it's 11 o'clock, it's not quite crackerjack. And if you're under the age of 30, you'll be thinking, what the hell is this person doing? But apparently it's coming back. So that's good. It's our last one of our insight conversations around the net zero reset. And it is my joy is the word actually, because she's got her flowers to say that Louise Kingham from the Energy Institute joins us. Good morning, Louise.
Good morning, Sumit. How are you?
Are they real or are they just fake?
No, of course they are. No, definitely.
Picked them up this morning. And Kevin Dibble, CEO of Energy Supply Division at ENGIE. Good morning, Kevin. Are you going to give us a tune?
Good morning. No, I will avoid that at all costs in the next
time. Ladies and gents, if you've not been with us all week, where have you been? But if you have, you'll know how it works. For those who are joining us for the first time, the platform is very simple to use. You'll see a place where you can ask a question. Please do so at any time, and we'll put it to our panelists probably towards the end. But if there's something that comes up during our discussions, then are you both happy to just take that question if it comes in at a relevant point? Is that okay, guys? Yeah. And then also, please rate this webinar and let us know what you thought, how good it was, how brilliant those flowers were from Louise, and how you'd like to subscribe daily. But tell us what you think we could improve. We'd like to get that there. Let's start with our survey, both of you, just so we can refresh our audience. And I can say thank you so much for all of you who did take part in our survey. So we looked at asking you a few questions about the net zero reset. And here are kind of overwhelming findings. So the first question we asked was, has COVID meant your net zero ambitions have been pushed back? And I'm delighted to say that 3/4 of you, 74% near enough, said no. You believe that actually net zero will continue despite all the issues around COVID. Excuse me. I then asked you whether timing was right. Is this the right time for you to capitalize on your net zero ambitions? Again, I was quite surprised that despite, the impending economic shock, around about 79% said to you, you thought this was actually a good time to go through with net zero. And this is the one that really, I suppose sums everything up. If there's going to be a net zero reset, if we're going to have net zero as a 2050 target to be achieved, should business lead that conversation and that journey? And I'm delighted to say 79% of you agreed with that. We did have about 1/5 of you saying that you thought COVID would put plans back, and that is a significant number. And of those who said that, around about 50% thought they didn't know how long that would be, perhaps until the lockdown is over. Around about 1/4 said about a year. And as you can see, some of you thought it would be 2 to 3 years. And then finally, this is probably a quirk of our database, but who answered our survey? Well, we had about 215 of you, 220 of you, and you seem to be either in the main SME sector or in the big corporates, not so much in the mid-market. And I do think that's a bit unusual, possibly just where our database is. So, Louise, I can hear the papers rustling. I'm going to be like teacher. Louise Kingham, please put your papers down. Can I ask both of you your first reactions to the top lines? The one perhaps that's all sort of more surprising is that people think it's the time to act is now, and also that businesses feel they should lead the sort of recovery in the net zero pathway. Kevin, let's start with you. What was your reaction to the survey?
Thanks, Simon. Well, not totally surprised actually. I think there's probably a couple of reasons why there's still a very positive outlook from businesses. I think one is that there was already significant awareness and progress being made leading up to this year, and so I think in very tangible terms, businesses they'd set targets, objectives, they put certain resources in place. So I think things were already moving, were already building, and had a certain amount of momentum in them. I think also, as we know, the kind of current situation has given us that kind of window on the future, that view of the importance of social and environmental issues, and so I think that's why companies are still holding on to that focus as a core strategy. And this is very much consistent actually with the feedback we get from our customers at the minute. So there is that continuity of interest and support that people need in developing zero carbon plans, for instance. I would say just on the other side of the coin, in terms of that 20 or so percent, then absolutely totally understand that there's concern, reticence, some delay in people's thinking.
Yeah.
So inevitably, all businesses have been affected. There are cash flow constraints which come into play, resource constraints through furlough and other logistical kind of challenges. So I totally get that other side as well. But I think again the feedback and the hope is that that's more of a temporary blip rather than a permanent change.
Yeah, absolutely. Louise, your first reactions to the survey?
Similar to Kevin, actually, it's really positive to see that there's so much optimism and that people really understand that there is business opportunity to come out the other side of this tragedy and this experience that we've sort of all been thrown in together and had to adjust to. So, there's a bit of me that while I'm sympathetic to sort of the same similar points that Kevin's made around the cause for concern about the economy and what we're next going to experience in that regard, particularly when things like furlough schemes start falling away, and the mechanisms that have been very much welcomed by business, the bounce back loans and so on. When all of those start to adjust, even with the government continuing to borrow to support the economy coming out this in a different way, it's really, really important, I think, that companies don't go backwards. And so I understand the hesitancy about moving forwards and at what pace can we do that and so on. But I think because there is so much opportunity, if government gets it right and sets some really positive and robust frameworks for business can accelerate in the direction of net zero, as opposed to go backwards and look at a revert to sort of some sort of business as usual, or even business beyond usual that it was previously. And I think that would be dangerous for companies to do that, to be honest.
I mean, as a members or organisation, obviously with a history in the oil and gas industry as well, with a lot of your members, how's the reaction been from your membership towards the whole net zero challenge, and sort of, are they open to it, or do they, if I was working in oil and gas, maybe I'd fear it. I don't know. What's been, as you've been looking over it over the last year, I know you've been doing some work on that. What's the general sort of consensus amongst Energy Institute members?
We do an annual survey, which I know you're familiar with, called the Energy Barometer. And that comes out, it's out next month actually. And so I can a heads up example of some of the content that's going to come out about how people feel about net zero in the professional energy world is, 4 out of 5 members agree that this should be an acceleration of the transition through this experience, and we should really harness it and crack on. I think for the oil and gas industry specifically, and our last big conversation around that was in February at IP Week, just before we went into lockdown. And we've spent the last sort of 5 years of that event really pushing members to have the conversation and then demonstrate the action that they're taking around climate change mitigation, and then obviously more subsequently, once we legislated in the UK, net zero, because other countries very quickly started to legislate too. So, and you've now got some of the bigger companies, particularly, who are already diversified energy companies, who are saying, let's advocate for taking the subsidies away from the oil and gas industry and re-engineering those so that they incentivise decarbonisation goals. Let's get ourselves out of exploration and production where there is sort of natural systems of protection, like preserves and so on. So they're already starting to change their business models and their operations. So, and I've seen at least 3 big organisations have come out and said that they are going to accelerate their plans to net zero. I think the challenge comes probably for the exploration businesses that are pure E&P businesses. I think that's what's more tricky, and there is a lot for them to be able to do around enhancing and optimizing operations and sort of twinning the operation of platforms with renewable power supply, and all these sorts of things that some of them are really starting to move on quite quickly. Taking methane out the system, which doesn't get talked about as much as carbon does, but actually it's, in terms of what it does to the environment, it's far more potent, particularly depending on the timescale that you look at it at. So there's lots of positive things that they're doing. I think probably what they need to do ideally is to come a little bit more together on how they articulate that and how they show people what they're doing. And I don't think, it's a bit like Kevin's point around, the ESG movement has started to specify what they're after, and they need to stop giving mixed messages to companies. They need to be really clear about what returns are palatable and that they can deal with and will expect. Because there's been a difference historically with those when you look at sort of returns from low carbon investment and returns from fossil fuels over time. So there's a shift that's there. And as Kevin mentioned, so the workforce is the biggest driver of change in a lot of these companies, actually, because we're all individual citizens and we're all saying to the boss, so what's our plan? Quite rightly. And having far more voice through different channels than we ever used to. So you put all of that together, it's really powerful.
ENGIE is transforming, isn't it, Kevin? Particularly in terms of like the power mix that you've traditionally have. How is that transition being driven, and how is it being received? Not just internally, but your clients as well, because it's a big shift for a lot of companies like yourselves to change what you were to what you're going to become.
Yeah, that's right. So we're obviously a large, organisation, energy and services organisation now, globally. So 150,000 employees or so. But we do have very different footprints in different parts of the group, and obviously in different territories. We instigated major change back in 2015, 2016, and that was really when kind of ENGIE as a brand was born out of GDF Suez as it was before then, and that signalled this radical change in strategy. In fact, internally that was literally a transformation, both in terms of how we're organised and also around the purpose of the organisation. And that purpose today has evolved to a point where it absolutely supports the acceleration of the transition to zero carbon. I mean, there's essentially the words that are in that statement, and obviously in the intervening period we've made decisions and taken actions that are absolutely consistent with that, and made massive progress in terms of our own portfolio, but also towards low carbon solutions, but also in terms of the way that we position ourselves to support customers and other clients to develop their own plans to develop those roadmaps and support them in the solutions that they need. So, as you say, it's there's an external and internal angle to this. We need to walk the talk ourselves, to demonstrate to customers that A, we know what we're talking about. B, we've got the solutions in place, and then that we can absolutely help to move the market forward. Because I think the zero carbon market itself is sort of starting to come together, and it's clearly much broader than the old sort of traditional boundaries around the energy sector. So it reaches into all the other areas of sustainability that we're familiar with.
But this transformation, you've done it. Dong has become Ørsted. What's the other one? Stat Oil has become, I can't remember what they call it, the change to Equinor. There's this, maybe we'll have BP is no longer BP, and British Gas is no longer British Gas. We've got to be realistic. Fossil fuels are not going to go away, and we have to get to net zero in a way that, as we're living this bubble, as I know Louise and I have talked about, where we're doing net zero because the economy pretty much shut down. Well, that's not the way we've got to be doing. So, it seems sometimes difficult to say to companies like yourselves that actually, are you trying to hide that fossil fuel element of yours? Because there isn't anything wrong with it. It's just trying to make it cleaner and less, isn't it? Because if we all stop using fossil fuels instantly, we would be in real chaos. And people don't want to admit that, but that is the real truth. So do you feel an external pressure that, you know, walking away from names and not just you, loads of companies are doing it, but yet we all know it's still a vital tenet of what keeps the lights on?
I think, yeah, that's certainly a recognition of the reality globally, and obviously the position on carbon emissions.
I get that. Different
renewables is
absolutely,
you know, I think your sort of comment around, you know, whether it's kind of a superficial thing around changing the name. I think absolutely you have to do all the things that back up your strategy at that point, and that's why I mentioned those changes to our portfolio and organisation are absolutely key to getting you along that path. But as you do that, as you say, you recognise that actually, you know, gas in particular is a you know, can be considered a kind of transition fuel in this sense. So we've certainly took the decision to focus on the you know, the more carbon intensive aspects of operation first. But you know, gas is in the DNA of ENGIE Group, you know, particularly in France, not necessarily the same history in the UK.
Yeah.
But it's definitely in the DNA of the group more generally, which gets you onto then, you know, having the skills and the platform to think about decarbonising that part of the group. So you know, we need to kind of, as you say, meet current supplies, but also work through future solutions.
I mean, I know, Louise, you had Bernard Looney, the BP boss, didn't you, at the IP week? And you know, as an example, again, you know, IP week, you know, right now there's an element that if everything's net zero, everything should be changed, and everything should be like, you shouldn't have any of these people there. How do you respond to that sort of? There is a fervour in some people to say it's all got to be renewables and it's all got to be now. And I know you believe there's a big skill base from oil and gas that people should really talk to around this net zero conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Kevin. I think it's and as you said, you know, you've got to be honest about the scale of the exercise and the time this journey will take. And I absolutely understand the viewpoint from people that want to put more pressure on that and see it go faster and further. And you're always going to have in life people who are on different parts of the spectrum of views on things. So, and I think for companies, what's important is to be transparent, is to be honest about where it's difficult, and is to welcome the views of the rest of the communities that they engage with, as opposed to just talking to themselves inside their businesses, to understand what the mood is and what the wants and the asks are. And I think that's what companies like BP, and that's what Bernard in February was saying to people, is that, you know, I get it, I understand that you want to see more, that you're not happy, that you want us to go faster. I get that, and we are trying to, but we don't have all the answers as I sit here now, but help us work out what they should be. And, you know, and then there are other things that they're doing about sort of removing themselves from partnerships with organisations that didn't advocate for moving towards meeting 1.5 degrees or net zero or whatever it was that people were promoting, or even that were actively advocating against that. Which some of the organisations historically have been accused of being responsible for and funding. So I think that it is about what you do more so than what you say now. And I think authenticity and, you know, being real on this one, even if you can sit there honestly and go, do you know what, I just don't know. Give us all the ideas. Let's have the ideas. Let's have the conversation. You know, there's lots of different debates about the target setting. You know, what's net zero? What's 1.5? What does 2 mean?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and also, you know, there's science-based targets. There's going to net zero. There's offsetting, what's credible offsetting, and so on and so forth. And, you know, I had to learn about this as the Institute made a pledge to go net zero in January. And then we said, right, well, let's do it via a science-based target and a whole series of sort of methodologies, because we're an evidence-based organisation. So that was important to us. And so offsetting is not in our plan. You know, we're going to go 70% cut by 2035, and it's not in our plan to offset anything at the moment. But it isn't to say that we will not look at that, because we will keep it under review. We're just not going to make that choice at the moment. And all these businesses are in exactly that position. I think everybody's looking at their options, looking at their choices, informing their strategic decisions, hopefully by listening to their stakeholders. But the journey, the direction of travel is clear. You know, the end game is should be, and as your survey says, you know, well over 3/4 of people know what the end game is here, and know what the ambitions are and direction of travel. But it is down to the companies to work out what are the choices that they want to make. Let's set out on that.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but let's talk about the one thing that did come up in the survey for the people particularly, and you raised it, Kevin. It is important to recognise, you know, around about a fifth said they feel nervous about it. It's not going to happen. It might be put back. But as we said earlier, the elephant in the Zoom. I like that one. I'll give that one to Nigel from Co-op. Kevin taking it. Is funding, right? Funding. Where will that funding come? For those sustainability managers, those people who have CEOs have changed their minds or they're ready to do it, and then they go, hang on a second, I just want to get the business out. I've got staff on furlough. I've got to sort this out now. You know, should that funding be coming from major corporates like yourselves? Kevin, should it be from the market? You know, is there funding there? Because they seem to be fairly confident, our respondents, that, you know, one comment which is part of our survey actually said, I do believe I'll be able to get more funding because what I'm looking for will save my company money in the future. And I think investors will offer new instruments because it's net zero. What's your view about finding money in definitely what was the cash market, Kevin?
Yeah, it's a really important point, isn't it, in terms of this the sort of recovery from this crisis as well. And I think, as you say, it probably will sort of sharpen the mind in businesses in terms of those investments and actually the financial benefits of those investments in this situation. I think, you know, energy efficiency is a great sort of example where, you know, I think typically people know that there's huge opportunity out there. And there's almost a big question: so, well, why don't people invest in energy efficiency where the paybacks potentially are really quite short? And there are all sorts of barriers, you know, and obstacles kind of in the way that maybe explain that. But, you know, perhaps in this situation, it will free people's minds up to perhaps, you know, move forward with some of those opportunities that may not have been priority, you know, in the past. So that's one point, sort of the recovery. But I think that, you know, the funding, you know, is there. I think the capital is there from a variety of sources, and I know, you know, and not just for ENGIE, obviously, you know, plenty of other routes.
So you'd offer that? Would you sort of off balance sheet solution?
Yeah, that's right. So I think we can, you know, we're already exploring with customers that the concept of, you know, moving the boundary in terms of asset ownership. To take that kind of cash flow pressure away on the initial investment, and then sell back through a, you know, as a service model over time, you know, either a specific investment in energy efficiency or a broader, you know, zero carbon plan as a service, in fact, which I think is the kind of goal of where you could go with this, which is you know, why I was kind of referring to the zero carbon market itself starting to develop. So it's broader than energy in that sense. So yeah, those solutions are already there, and in pockets are already happening. And it may be, you know, coming out of this crisis that, you know, absolutely we'll see more interest in a growth in those sorts of partnership arrangements going forward.
Louise, do you think the money will be there?
Absolutely, yeah, I do. I really do. Yeah, and I think this is, if you listen to some sort of commentary that compares this situation with the financial crisis.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
we went oil and gas, didn't we, straight away?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's different. I think things have moved on, and I think that this is where the role of government is actually quite important in setting frameworks. So that people feel comfortable with the stability in releasing that investment from different sources. But there's also things around sort of taxation that can be utilised, green bonds, securitisation, for where you've got sort of, you want to be able to aggregate lots of smaller supports in the financial system, and therefore it's not sort of big government that is necessarily helpful in doing that, but routes around securitisation and other mechanisms could be really helpful, I think. bringing forward sort of a CFD round. You know, there's things that are in the system already that the government, if it gives the right signals, then I think investors will have confidence. And, you know, all of those final investment decisions that are sitting inside company boardrooms at the moment could suddenly start to move if we get that incentive package right. And then I think there is also a role, sorry, Sumit, just to finish very quickly on this one, for government to either finance or co-finance public infrastructure investment. You know, and the National Infrastructure Plan needs to have low carbon energy infrastructure investment right at the top of the list for us to really get on as a sector and work with the construction and manufacturing sectors and the others that have also got to go on their own decarbonisation journeys, as well as support what we need to do in the energy sector directly.
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, this platform is all about multiples. I mean, you know, we have Co-op as a member, Arriva are joining us very soon, and the embedded carbon question. But one thing that does come up, and you mentioned it briefly there, Louise, is the price of carbon, a carbon tax. What is your view, both of you, on the idea of a carbon tax? Because I spoke to a CEO from Schneider Electric, American sort of VP, and he said, I know the price of a barrel of oil. I get that every day. I have no idea what a ton of carbon costs, right? And it's completely different in different countries, and is it a state thing? And if there was a market, then that really sharpens minds. Start with you, Kevin. Do you think there should be a price on carbon, whether it's a tax or not? There should be a price that we all kind of know this is what something costs the planet when we use it.
Yeah, good question. And I think this has been, kicking around for some time. And I think, clearly we already have certain carbon taxes embedded in our systems and our markets. And I guess the point you're making is that they don't necessarily coalesce into one sort of visible public number. I mean, the most visible, obviously, is the sort of European trading scheme on emissions, and obviously topically we're potentially exiting that scheme.
We know this week. The news this week. We're doing our own version. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the government's consulting on kind of what the replacement might be for that, and how that sort of interacts with the markets in a similar way. So there is. I mean, that is one visible price, I guess, at a European level. You've also got the kind of recovery challenge now, and whatever fiscal measures the government thinks it needs to bring in to repair the balance sheet generally, and perhaps fund some of the sort of green investments. So I think clearly this. I think there will be some movement on this. It feels like there will be some initiative on some kind of carbon tax. I think we have to be careful around the way that's targeted, the kind of distributive effects of a tax. So I think government would be kind of nervous around how that might play out. But I think they're going to
get pressure, aren't they? They're going to get pressure from environmental. Yeah. They're going to get pressure from businesses, as Louise was saying.
That's right. Yeah. So I think we're expecting something to come through as a proposal. I think it will fit with that green recovery plan, and I think it'll be, if it's targeted right, I think that should be welcome.
Louise, do you think a carbon tax is needed? And of course, we'll just talk UK for now, but obviously for it to really work, you need a global one, don't you? You need a global price on carbon.
Yeah, I mean, you're hearing an increasing amount of calls from business to have some sort of well-designed price floor, so that this can really be truly costed in to the work that the companies do and the decisions that the companies make, so that you have some sort of recognition that everybody understands, as you say, about how valuable it is to make the right choices in the pathway to decarbonise. So, I'm not an expert by any means on designing an actual mechanism. So whether it's tax credits or a price floor or whatever, and we've obviously got a variety of things that already exist at the moment. But I think the important thing for the clever people that design these things is to make sure that they don't become perverse incentives. So now that you've got some companies starting to say, okay, stop subsidising certain things that don't work towards decarbonisation and start thinking about what those incentives could look like, not just in business for business decisions, but for us as consumers as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, somebody's talked. I was in an event the other week where someone was saying, "Well, look at VAT. Why not drive consumer behaviour on VAT and take it off energy efficient products and services? 20% is worth a few quid in the back pocket, and it might just be that nudge somebody needs to make a different choice." So it's not just about what business needs; it's right the way through the system.
Let's talk about one thing that I think doesn't come up enough, and we have talked about it this week, which is good because everyone's engaged on it. Low carbon heat. I think that's one of the things that's going to be the biggest challenge, because I can see EVs progressing. I can see, obviously, energy efficiency. We've seen it for years. Electricity is where we've hit it. We've really not done much with heat. And I wonder why that is. Is it simply because, as someone said, one of our speakers, it's just too bloody difficult? So we've put it on the back burner. Excuse the pun. Kevin, low carbon heat. How do we tackle it? Because that's the thing that really is the most common thing for all of us at home, is most of us, 90%, have got a gas boiler, right? So, how many of us got ground source heat pumps? How many of us are thinking of different things? Where do you think the challenge around low carbon heat is, and what do you think the solutions might be?
Yeah, so I empathise with that sort of earlier response that you had. It's just, it's just very difficult, and I think it is known as the one of the more difficult sort of sectors, if you like, in terms of addressing this whole challenge. And that's why electricity was seen as relatively easy. It's why we've made the progress that we have in that area. And obviously, and perhaps compared to somewhere like France, which has a lot of electric heating already, we have that legacy of the North Sea and the investment we've made in natural gas here to kind of get over in terms of transforming our own system. So yes, it is difficult, I think, and obviously the kind of broad solutions are around either electrification and you mentioned heat pumps and so on. And I think there's maybe room for, as part of government's kind of stimulus package here on, either people buying EVs or other technology. But I think heat pumps and storage solutions should be part of that kind of process. So that's definitely one area, because obviously the power system itself is decarbonised, very significantly, to a point at which the electrification looks quite attractive overall. But I think that doesn't mean we ditch the idea of trying to address the gas system itself. Looking at those solutions. There are biogas solutions out there, albeit kind of constrained or limited in terms of volumes. And then of course there's the sort of big questions around hydrogen technology and to what extent that can contribute. So I think it will clearly put that back on the agenda if it wasn't already, and I think we can expect more. There's already funding announced from government on this, and I think from the last budget. So I think we expect that in this budget in July to reinforce that as well. So.
Yeah, I mean the France thing, you're right. There's a lot more electricity used for heat, but then they got 50? I can't remember how many nuclear power stations they've got. They got a lot of nuclear power. So that's the other side of the argument we won't do here. Heat will be the big challenge, won't it, Louise? Because you can see that we can become more efficient with their electricity. We can see that we could have cars that are driven by batteries, but heating, for the power that we need for heating, gas is very, very efficient, and it's relatively cheap for the amount of thermal units you get for it compared to the infrastructure costs for that. So do your members, has that come up, the issue around the challenge of heat?
Yes, and we'll be saying a bit more on it next month when the barometer report comes out. But I think learn from the master. I think the thing that would be really helpful with this, to give government the confidence to be brave on the policy framework for heat, because it has been difficult. I think your speaker previously that said it's just really hard is not wrong. And largely the reason it's hard is the point you made. A lot of people, this is an intrusive change potentially in lots of people's homes.
I like gas cookers. I can't.
Yeah. And I think and I think it's so it does require some bravery in the decision making and some commitment to the choice that gets made. But I don't think it's helpful to say, is it gas or is it electric? Are we going hydrogen or are we going heat pumps? Because it's not going to be the case. If you look at the technology and you look at the system, actually we're going to need both of those things. And then you've got local heat networks in urban environments, and in which are brilliant for certain situations, useless in others. And so we have to be really pragmatic and start with the science bit that says the right solutions in the right places, and essentially we'll be reconfiguring the heat network to have multiple solutions to it. So this debate or noise over is it one thing or is it the other is not going to help policymakers to land on the framework we need for everyone to be able to deliver the heat system that we need in the UK.
Yeah. I think you might have a bit of touch of your Darren Brown about you, Louise, because you literally, as you were talking about heat networks, the questions popped up about that.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Or you've got someone working behind the scenes.
No, there's no one under the desk telling me, no, not at all. We're just obviously on the same wavelength.
I suppose the last thing before we start taking questions is, as we transition and, we look at all the new skills, the data that will be there, are we going to need different people working in our sectors? Are we going to have to use, dare I say, loads of computer nerds? They're going to be suddenly flooding into energy. Are we going to have very different people who understand about kind of, I don't know, the breakdown of hydrogen, chemists, whatever? So is there a skills and sort of people challenge as well for this net zero?
There are, it's not necessarily different people. There'll be more people. We'll need more people. And for some existing people, I think there'll be new jobs and new skills to develop. But they'll have a lot of synergy with maybe things. So a lot of people who work in the different bits of the oil and gas industry today can be absolutely repurposed for working in a CCUS and a hydrogen world of the very near future. So there's an awful lot that it can be transferred. But I agree with you. I think there are also some new skills and more people that will be required for a net zero workforce, if you want for a better description. So we were just talking about heat, right? It's a great example. So for thinking about retrofitting buildings, the design of new buildings and getting this right this time round, then it's training support and new skills for building designers, builders, installers of low carbon heating, to understand the right applications in the right situations, so they give the right advice when they go in to somebody's home, and they're sort of tooled up to do it effectively. All of those things will need a lot more effort put into them to do this at scale and in the time that we've got. So, and I do think there is a job to do around we hear about it as T-shaped people, so the functional depth of people is still really important, right? So we still need our STEM people and our commercial people, and that's not going to go away, but actually the breadth of those folks needs to expand. So their digital savviness, their analytical capabilities, their environmental awareness, actually if they don't have it now, they'll need to develop it quite quickly to understand about the choices that their businesses might make in the work that they're doing. So, and of course the opportunity there is our sector hasn't looked great on diversity, right? And that I bang on about that a lot, because I'm really passionate about it. And actually only put out in a statement about the value of inclusion in society and for better business earlier this week when we launched the Powerful Women Stats. So there's a real opportunity for us to bring that diversity in and reach out to new recruits that we just historically have not appealed to. And that's not just about more women in the system, but all manner of creative thought and new thinking, because we're going through a transformation. So we're doing a lot of innovation. We need some new thinking as well as the thinking we've got.
Yeah, Kevin, any comments on the people challenge?
Yeah, and I agree with what Louise is saying there, absolutely. And I think as part of the transformation I was talking about earlier for us, just in terms of our experience and broadening out our perspective on life, then yeah, I think we've definitely kind of started to diversify much more in terms of the skills and the type of people that we've got coming in the organisation. And that will only continue. I think the energy system is going to get more complex, and that requires a few brains to sort of unpick all that and help sort of navigate through. I think the other thing I was going to add on this point, and we were talking about the green recovery plans earlier, I think there's a lot of evidence around a sort of a green stimulus as opposed to a traditional stimulus, I guess, around the sort of effectiveness of that and in terms of job creation, and I think so that's a really important kind of foundation for us in terms of getting people trained up in energy efficiency, in EV charging, all of these things that we need to sort of refit and remobilize on. So there's great opportunity.
Yeah, I think we're going to start. Questions are coming in, which is great. Keep them coming, ladies and gents. We'll go to them after this. One last thing, and I think the last thing we ought to talk about is transport. And we've had it from Monday. We have to wear masks on the tube and all of that stuff. But the transport system is going to be the net. If we look at our big power generation, I think we're on the pathway to doing that. Decarbonize so much over the last 10 years. But heat we've talked about. But EVs and transport, how big a challenge is that? It's all very well government saying get rid of petrol and diesel cars by 2035 or 2040 or whatever it is and changing the targets. But they cost a lot. The infrastructure's not there. There's a whole bunch of environmental questions about the batteries and their lives and all of that stuff. So the EV and sort of that sort of transport challenge, what are your views on that? Let's start with you, Kevin.
Yeah, as you say, this is the next sort of big sector to address. And I guess land use is probably the fourth one in that whole mix, isn't it? And I think I guess again, just referring back to the current situation where we've cut down massively on transport. There's even that move away from public to private transport, actually, which is an interesting dynamic. Going to be interesting to see how long that persists. Certainly the government sort of plans on decarbonisation transport focus more on public transport. So, does it sort of, drive a bit of a hole through that is an open question. I'm more optimistic than you are, Sam, I think, by a question in terms of EV potential. Certainly, I mean, partly based on my own personal experience of
you've got one.
making that change about 18 months, 2 years ago, and actually, I found it amazing. So very, very quick, very easy, and friends and family are bored of me talking about it. With
respect, I live in a little flat in North London, and where am I going to charge? I can't. I can't plug into my house. It's not like that. If you got a driveway, it makes sense, but it is difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. Totally understand. Again, we've got a sort of legacy infrastructure in place there, and behaviours that everyone's used to, and transforming that is difficult, absolutely. So I'm not saying we can't kind of make this happen overnight for everybody in the same way, but I think again there's an opportunity to get some of this infrastructure right. The charging times are coming down, the battery storage is going up, so the technology is moving, the costs are coming down rapidly, so I think this is the perfect time, again back to the sort of green stimulus point. It's a perfect time really to push forward on that, get the infrastructure that we need, provide the incentives to individuals to make the switch, which gets over this kind of bridge when you're coming up the curve in terms of maturity of the technology, then just helping get more people to make that change. I think government really needs to kind of step into that.
Louise, it needs financial backing, doesn't it? It really needs the government to make it that way, and manufacturers are working on it, but unless it's cheaper, you're not going to do it. For most people, the environmental thing comes second to putting food on the table, and a car for a lot of people is vital to get their family around, and that might be a diesel car right now.
Yeah, it is, and there are going to have to be some sort of brave decisions made. But I think, and there is a decarbonisation transport plan that's due, I think, later this year. And of course, with this experience that we've all been living through, I would hope that that's going to be quite significantly reviewed, because if you look at sort of the Committee on Climate Change and what some others are calling for, they're talking about really harnessing some of the value this difficult experience and using that in a very positive way. So, thinking about how to plan places to be easier to walk from A to B for those that can, continuing to make cycling safer and really promoting that.
Yeah,
absolutely. So that would sort you out. You see, you won't need to charge it, but you just get on your bike and go from North London to South. You'll be fine. And I think it's not so much about. I agree with Kevin. Actually, people being cautious about the public transport system now, rather than pushing people back into their cars. And maybe they're potentially illegal cars, because bear in mind they're also consulting on bringing this number forward to 20, by another 5 years. So it could go even earlier than is being proposed at the moment, and quite a few people are calling for that. So one of the other things that government needs to think about in its recovery plan to facilitate this and supporting a decarbonised transport and the right behaviours coming out the other side is to make sure that they're facilitating the digital networks effectively, so that more of us can continue to work remotely doing these things, and therefore reducing the amount of travel that we need to do, not necessarily under lockdown situations, but not going back to how we used to do it before. And harnessing like the way that we're interacting now, not all the time, not for everything, but for an awful lot of things. All of that can continue. So 5G, fibre broadband infrastructure investment in the UK, really, really important to crack on and accelerate that, so that we don't all jump back in the car and rush off to a meeting.
Right.
Yeah, maybe just to add on that. So I think if you ask people before this, well, in 10 years' time or 15 years' time or so, what do you think your kind of working pattern's likely to be? And people would probably say, well, I think I'll be working from home a lot more. There'll be more technology to support me. I won't be traveling as much. And now we've had a real experience of that. So we need to kind of make sure that we lock that in.
Yeah, absolutely. And when
I'm quite keen to come back to the office with a toddler, so I'm going to tell you that one. I'll be here.
Well, as I've got 3 kids and 2 dogs, I'm quite keen to get out of the house too. But that's a whole nother story.
Let's take our questions. So here's one. It's a question for you, a direct question about ENGIE. Here we go. So there you go. I don't know where this has come from. Right, where is it? So. Hang on. Actually, no, I won't do that one. Let me just I'll come back to that one. Do we need to publish carbon emissions of all organisations to show how they're performing, and then couple that with a carbon tax to raise funds? That's an interesting one. Kevin, let's start with you. So there's an index of what we're doing. Yeah,
and there is already, certain disclosures on carbon reporting and different reports, but maybe the question is more around whether there could be something that's more visible, more centralized, and so on. I think as we said earlier, I think transparency and honesty is an important part of this and understanding the challenge. So to me, transparency on that topic is important. So to the extent that there isn't anything sort of in place currently which meets that need, and I think there is already stuff, then yeah, I'd agree.
Louise?
Well, I think as somebody who's a serving CEO and also a non-exec director, I think there's some governance issues which if we were pushing on the reporting, we would make some really positive adjustments to. And by that I mean, find me how many companies had pandemic on their risk register and knew what this experience was going to go like. But find me all of the finance directors and CEOs that get locked in long meetings looking at the risk register and thinking about it, right? So now I think that one of the valuable lessons from this is we can't anticipate everything, but we have to become really flexible and agile in how we operate to be ready for anything. And so that impacts on how we think about risk, then impacts on the choices that we make in a business when you're sat around that board table or you're leading the company. So I think what's really important to see on the reporting is that businesses understand their climate risks. Yeah, so there's the reporting, as Kevin says, is absolutely right. The routine, how are we doing? What target did we set? How are we doing? How do we measure this? Being very transparent about methodologies, in the routine reporting. But I also think there's a step back from that in the boardroom, which is, do we as a board and a business really understand our climate risk, and do we tell people what that is? Because if investors aren't all asking for that now, they should be going forward. They really, and I know that some are, but I think that's a really important addition for business, to be just upfront and saying, we thought about it. And again, it's possibly one of those, we don't completely understand what that might be, but given that a lot of this is not just about mitigation, it's about adaptation now on the timeline that we're at, then we've got to be thinking about both of those things in our strategies going forward.
Someone says, I'd consider changing my gas combi to a heat pump, but what would happen to my gas connection? Would I still have to pay a gas standing charge? The interesting questions about the things we normally have built in if we have these new technologies. Kevin, we're going to have new charging structures for what we do, don't we?
Yeah, I think this is it's an interesting area, this, isn't it? And it's an example maybe where the regulation and the charging arrangements will need to kind of catch up with these developments and a more complex sort of hybrid system. That's right, because otherwise it provides disincentives, obviously, to make some of those changes, quite obviously. But then you have got challenges because you've got legacy costs of the network to recover over maybe a smaller group of customers. So you've got some really thorny issues there to try and.
It's like I still have to pay for my landline. I never use it to get my broadband. These are the sort of things that networks are going to have issues with, trading locally and all of those things. Do you think the charging infrastructure and how it works, Louise, will have to be completely rethought? Because as technology drives how we do it, and if it's all done with this, then why am I paying for pipes and cables? So that you're right. The financial models for pricing for services will have to change, and the real. I also think the real cost of all of these things will have to then play through for the consumer. So we've got to be really careful that we don't create, when we look at those financial models, that we don't create further inequality amongst consumers, because that is already a huge problem, and we can't let that get any worse. Another question about heating and gas. Alternate heat solutions for gas grid, like green and blue hydrogen, are more expensive than natural gas, right? And projections over 10 years. So how can this extra cost be justified to the consumer? That's the one, isn't it? We all want to go green, but don't want to pay for it. Kevin?
Yeah, there's certainly an element of that. That's right. The sort of green consumer. Example, you buy a new fridge, you put it in the kitchen, you put the old one in the garage, and you fill it with beer.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not. It highlights the point. It's not my own personal experience, I should add.
Okay, it's not. Depends what beer. It's an eco beer, so we're fine with that one.
Yeah, possibly homebrew stuff. So no, but I think it does sort of neatly illustrate the challenge, and there absolutely is an affordability point, and again, the current situation absolutely kind of reinforces that. So we have to kind of bridge this gap somehow, and I think in terms of hydrogen, I think we're in that kind of R&D phase, aren't we? And with that focus, that investment, and it's the same for CCS really. We've seen the kind of cost curves on offshore wind. We've seen that on batteries. So I think that's what we have to sort of hang our hat on, and ultimately, a low carbon economy.
We have to pay, don't we? We have to pay because the end user has to pay.
Yeah, and I think whether that's through that it's the end user as a customer or the taxpayer, that's the difficult decision to make that allocation.
Oh dear, something's happening. Louise, are you getting some interference?
I'm very sorry about the interruption. It might vaguely be possible that I've got children doing some schoolwork and trying to print something.
Oh, it's the printer.
That would be very interesting for a Friday, but anyway, yes.
What about this point here about it's all very well to say this, but we've seen the construction industry lobby against zero carbon homes. Is there a risk that if we push too fast, industry may push back? Louise?
I understand the point, but I think there's enough of the right sort of narrative and mood music now in business that I don't expect to see that happening. Certainly not by those who've got large parts of the market share in industries and are capable with their balance sheets of moving. You know, if you look at letters that have been sent to Mr. Johnson in recent weeks from the different sectors and the leaders of companies in different sectors, including manufacturing, including construction, including the service industry, including retail, they are all saying the same thing. They want to come back better from this experience, and they want to get on and get working towards net zero. So I would be very surprised, and I understand that there'll be elements within sectors where people are uncomfortable or they want to push back on this change. But I think we're on this track now. I just don't see that those voices will be heard this time round.
Okay, this is the question for ENGIE, and I don't know if you know the answer to this one. Question on certification. There are a number of standards out there that companies wear on their sleeves, such as carbon trust, etc. Has ENGIE got any plans to adopt a standard? Don't know. Have you?
Don't know for sure, but okay. You're right.
You'll look into.
yeah, we'll look into it. But I think you're right. There is a bit of a sort of mix out there, and it's a good question around the whole standardisation point. Yeah. And I think that will evolve over time. I suspect on this. I think there's, the standards around energy services, for instance, that can sort of help here. But obviously, it's potentially a broader topic. So yeah, I mean, we as I say, we refer to some of those benchmarks, if you like, and verifications on climate marks, if you like, in terms of carbon assessments and so on, which is all well and good. But I suspect over time that will kind of converge and develop.
Yeah. We look at the question of heat networks, and this one is, the panel. What does the panel think about the Scottish Government's proposed heat networks, which was the one when you were talking? Is it the right move to incentivise dealing this? And you sort of said they sometimes work, they don't, Louise. I mean, are heat networks a real pathway to low carbon heat? Because you could say it works where it's being built brand new, but retrofitting a heat network is an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, no, it is a challenge, but I think the issue is that the point I was making before is that actually in sort of highly dense urban areas, your tower blocks and social housing situations, and the fact that actually we still need a lot of this stuff to be built, there is the opportunity to have heat networks operating. And also there's the opportunity where communities come together, and that's another piece that we should save from this situation, is the sort of the re-emergence, if you like, of local action and sense of community is back. Yeah. So there's an opportunity there, I think, for communities, if we give them the right support and the right information and the right help, then they could happily be working out how do we get this done with the minimum disruption. It's the same as doing a hydrogen network across 7 cities in the north of England. That's not that it isn't disruptive. It is, and it will take 7 years, only working over the summer months when people don't need the boilers on. Yeah. So you have to think about how clever workarounds for how to get these things done. But I think looking for problems with these things now is something we need to kind of try and move on from, and we need to be much more solution orientated, I think.
Okay, I think I'm sorry, Leslie, we've pretty much run out of time. Some final thoughts from both of you. Kevin, I've asked everyone this, and it's fair to ask you: are you optimistic about the future in the short term post COVID for the net zero kind of people involved in trying to drive net zero?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for a number of the reasons we've already discussed, I think there's definite scope to be more optimistic now. I think it's a massive opportunity at this point. We've had that kind of window into the future of what life can be like for us, how the power system's been running, and we need to take advantage of that. And we need the government to play its part. But as we've said, I think business can play a huge role in driving the agenda forward.
Yeah, and briefly, Louise, from you.
I completely agree with Kevin, and I would suggest that business doesn't wait for government, but business does as much as it possibly can to help and inform with a decent evidence base how government gets this right with twinning economic recovery and the net zero journey, decarbonisation. It's doable.
And just so you know, and it's very kind of the Energy Institute, apparently there's a discount for our FNZ subscribers for some of your courses. Is that right?
Yeah, we've put all the energy management training online, so more than happy. If anyone's been logged in this week, not just to this event, then they're more than happy, and we'll try and do all the help we can.
And 20%, I like it, Louise. That's what we want to have.
We try.
Ladies and gents, my thanks to both Kevin and Louise for joining us. I hope you've really enjoyed this webinar and this whole week that we've done. And Louise and Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Louise, hope the homework gets done. Kevin, I hope you hear Rachmaninoff off on that one soon. And all the best. Take care and look after yourselves.
You too. Keep well. Thanks very much.